So, picture this. Mark. Just a regular guy, you know. Works a desk job, probably complained about his commute. He was in downtown Chicago, during rush hour, when it all went south. 1 minute, horns blaring, people rushing, the next, chaos. Absolute, unadulterated chaos. He saw it start subtly, a guy stumbling, then a scream. Then another. People were falling, their eyes glazing over, this weird, guttural moaning starting to come out. Before he could even process what was happening, that stumbling guy was on someone else, not biting, not scratching, but tearing into them with this primal hunger. Mark's mind, man, it short-circuited. He saw a woman, a mom with a stroller, get swarmed. The baby, still in the carrier, it was over in seconds. He couldn't breathe. He just stood there for a beat, frozen, watching this horror unfold. Then the instinct kicked in. Run. He shoved his way through the panicked crowd, the screams of the dying mixing with the screams of the living. He saw people he recognized from his office, colleagues, now just monsters, shambling, eyes vacant, mouths dripping. It wasn't just the violence, it was the transformation. Seeing someone you knew, someone you'd had coffee with, become this thing. It messes with you. It makes you question everything. He managed to barricade himself in a small, dusty antique shop. The adrenaline was pumping, but underneath it, a cold dread was creeping in. He was alone. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. The windows were boarded up, but he could still hear the moaning, the scraping, the sickening thuds from outside. Hunger started gnawing at him, a dull ache that quickly turned into a gnawing panic. He found some stale crackers, but they tasted like ash. Every creak of the building, every distant noise, sent jolts of fear through him. He kept thinking about his family, about his friends. Were they safe? Were they, one of them? Hours passed. Or maybe it was days. Time became a blurry, meaningless concept. He heard shouting, then more moaning. A struggle. Silence. Then, the scraping at his door began. Slow, deliberate, like something testing the wood. What do you do when the world has gone mad, and the only ones left are the ones who want to eat you? You either break, or you find a way to keep going. What would you do, stuck in that shop, with the scraping getting louder? Look, I know this is probably the last anyone will hear of me. If somehow, someone finds this recording, please remember. Mark. He was here. He saw it. He's trying to survive. If you're out there, and you're alive, just keep going. Don't give up. And if you find this, hit that like button, subscribe to whatever's left. Just, give this a boost. Maybe it'll help someone else. I'm not sure what else to say. The scraping, it's getting closer. The air grew thick and heavy, not just with the stale scent of decay, but with a palpable dread. Mark pressed himself further into the cramped space, his breath hitching with every distant creak and groan. The initial panic had subsided, replaced by a cold, gnawing fear that settled deep in his gut. He hadn't heard anything specific after the recording cut out, just the general cacophony of the outside world that seemed to amplify the silence within his hiding spot. He'd stayed put for what felt like hours, his muscles screaming in protest, his eyes darting to every sliver of light that dared to pierce the darkness. He needed to move. Staying in one place was a death sentence. The recording had mentioned Mark, implying whoever made it knew he was around. That meant whoever, or whatever, was out there might be looking for him. He peeked out again, the hallway a murky, distorted landscape. A faint, rhythmic thudding echoed from somewhere to his left, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. It wasn't the scraping from the recording, but it was equally unsettling, a new sound in the symphony of terror. He had to choose a direction, and fast. Going back the way he thought he came seemed too risky, too familiar with the unknown dangers that might have staked it out. The thudding grew louder, closer. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the encroaching silence. He could almost feel the vibrations through the floor. He knew he couldn't fight whatever was making that sound, not if it was anything like the faint, unsettling noises he'd heard before. His only hope was to disappear, to blend into the oppressive gloom. He decided on the opposite direction of the thudding, a dark alcove that promised only deeper shadows. Each step was a gamble, a silent prayer that the floorboards wouldn't betray him. The air tasted metallic, like old blood, and he couldn't tell if it was real or just his imagination playing tricks. He reached the alcove, a narrow gap between collapsed shelves. It was even darker here, so dark he could barely make out his own hands. The thudding continued, a steady, relentless march. He could hear other sounds now, softer ones, like wet shuffling, punctuated by guttural, low growls that sent shivers down his spine. They were moving, spreading out. He had to get out of this building, but how? Every exit he'd seen was either blocked or too exposed. He was trapped, a mouse in a maze with unseen predators closing in. He huddled deeper into the alcove, trying to make himself as small as possible, his senses on high alert for any sign of discovery. The silence, when it fell, was almost worse than the noise, a brief, terrifying lull before the storm. He waited, breath held, listening. The shuffling sounds continued, but they seemed further away now. Maybe they had moved on, or maybe they were just being more careful. He couldn't risk staying put. Peeking out again, he saw a flicker of movement at the far end of the corridor. It was one of them, silhouetted against a distant light. He needed a distraction. Scanning the alcove, his eyes fell on a loose panel near the floor. It looked old, probably leading to some service tunnel or ventilation shaft. It was a long shot, but his only shot. With a surge of adrenaline, he worked at the panel, his fingers fumbling with the rusty screws. The panel creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow opening. It smelled of damp earth and something metallic. He didn't hesitate. Slipping into the darkness, he pulled the panel shut behind him, plunging himself into near-total blackness. He crawled forward, the rough ground scraping his knees and hands. The sounds from above were muffled now, a distant rumble. He kept crawling, unsure of where he was going. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes widening, sometimes narrowing so much he had to exhale to squeeze through. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature, it was the chilling realization of how alone he was. He couldn't see his hands in front of his face. He relied solely on touch, feeling his way along the cold, damp walls. After what felt like hours, he heard a faint sound ahead. It was a scraping noise, rhythmic. Hope flared. He pushed forward faster, ignoring the pain in his scraped limbs. The sound grew louder, and then he saw it, a sliver of light. He crawled towards the light, his heart pounding. He emerged into a small, dusty room. It looked like an old storage area, filled with discarded equipment and cobwebs. But there was a door, and it was ajar. Through the gap, he could see a dimly lit hallway. He stumbled to his feet, testing his balance. He was weak, but he was out of the immediate danger. He pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway. It was empty. He moved cautiously, peering into each room he passed. Most were empty, filled with the same dusty detritus. Then he heard it. Voices. Not the guttural sounds he'd heard before, but something more familiar. He crept closer to the sound, hiding behind a stack of crates. He saw two figures in the distance, their backs to him. They were talking, their voices low. He strained to hear, hoping for any clue. One of them gestured toward something on a table. He couldn't make out what it was, but the gesture seemed important. Then, the conversation shifted. He heard a name he recognized. It was the name of someone he knew, someone who shouldn't be here. He froze, a cold dread washing over him. This was more complicated than he'd thought. He had to understand what was happening, but he couldn't reveal himself. The two figures turned, and he ducked back behind the crates, his heart hammering against his ribs. He knew he was in deeper than he ever imagined. My name is Liam, or at least it was. Now, I'm just another shadow in this rotting husk of a city. I was on Elm Street, grabbing some groceries when it started. 1 minute, people were bumping into each other, complaining about the heat. The next, a woman just snapped. Ripped a chunk out of a man's arm with her teeth. Blood everywhere. Then, the screaming. Chaos. Pure, unadulterated panic. I saw things then that I can still taste when I wake up at night. A mother, still clutching her purse, gnawing on what used to be her child. Another man, his eyes milky and vacant, chasing a terrified dog with a hunger that wasn't human. The transformation, it was fast. A fever, then the aggression, then this. I remember thinking, this isn't real. Like a bad movie. But the smell, that coppery, rotten stench, that was too real. The sounds, the gurgling moans, the wet, tearing noises, they're etched into my brain. I bolted, pushed through the stampede of people, some already showing the signs, others just blind with terror. My apartment building was a nightmare. The lobby was littered with bodies, some still twitching. I didn't have time to think about my neighbors. Survival instinct kicked in, hard and cold. I scrambled up the fire escape, praying no one would notice me, praying that thing that had been Mrs. Henderson from 3B wouldn't hear me. Days blurred into a grim routine of scavenging and hiding. Every shadow was a threat, every distant groan sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Food became a desperate, all-consuming need. Canned beans, stale crackers, whatever I could find in abandoned stores. The trust factor. Gone. I saw a group of survivors trying to break into a pharmacy. They looked desperate, like me. Then I saw one of them shove another, aiming for the last can of peaches. It devolved into a brutal fight, not against the dead, but against each other. That's when I realized the worst part wasn't just the monsters outside, but the people inside. The ones you thought you could count on. I learned to move alone. Solitude was safer than the company of those driven by fear and desperation. The constant anxiety gnaws at you. Every moment is a calculation. Is it worth the risk? Is there food? Water? Or just more of them? Or worse, more of us, changed. The silence that followed the last scream was heavier than any noise. It was the kind of quiet that pressed in, making your own heartbeat sound like a drum. I moved through the remains of the settlement, a ghost in a place that used to be home. Rationing what little food I found was a constant battle, not just against hunger, but against the gnawing paranoia. Every shadow could hold a threat, every rustle of leaves a prelude to a final confrontation. I'd learned to be efficient, to take only what I needed and leave no trace. It was a lonely existence, a constant surveillance of my surroundings, a mental checklist of escape routes and potential hiding spots. The instinct for survival had become second nature, overriding all other emotions. Sleep was a luxury, usually stolen in brief, fitful bursts, with one eye always open. The nights were the worst, filled with the distant moans and the unnerving scratching sounds that seemed to come from everywhere at once. One evening, while scouting a deserted farmhouse, I found a hidden cellar. It was dusty and smelled of damp earth, but it was intact. Inside, a small stash of canned goods and, more importantly, a jug of fresh water. It felt like finding a treasure chest. As I was about to leave, a faint, irregular thumping echoed from deeper within the cellar. It wasn't the shuffling gait I knew, but something more, rhythmic, yet broken. My hand instinctively went to the makeshift weapon I carried. The thumping continued, growing slightly louder, closer. It was coming from behind a thick, wooden door, bolted from the outside. Curiosity warred with a primal urge to flee. I cautiously approached the door, straining my ears. A low, guttural sound, a choked moan, punctuated the thumping. It sounded like something trapped, something struggling against its confinement. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Had someone survived? Or had something else found its way in? I hesitated, my knuckles white against the cold wood of the door. The thumping intensified, a desperate, insistent beat against the thick planks. I could feel the vibrations under my fingertips. A sliver of light, barely visible, appeared from beneath the door, accompanied by a faint, metallic tang in the air, a smell I'd come to associate with them. But this was different. This felt contained. It felt like a trap waiting to be sprung, or perhaps a desperate plea from within. The decision weighed on me. To open it was to invite unknown danger, to potentially face something I couldn't handle alone. To leave it closed was to abandon whatever was on the other side, a moral quandary I hadn't truly considered in weeks. The thumping suddenly stopped, replaced by a low, ragged breathing. Then, a soft scraping sound, as if something were dragging itself across the floor. The sliver of light beneath the door vanished. The silence that followed was almost more terrifying than the sounds. It was the silence of anticipation, the quiet before the inevitable. The sudden cessation of the thumping and the shift to that ragged breathing sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through me. It wasn't just the noise anymore, it was the sound of something trying to get in, something injured or exhausted, but still determined. When the light under the door winked out, my breath hitched. It felt like a finality, a seal being placed on the other side, not to keep something out, but to keep whatever was therein. Or maybe it meant the thing had finally made it through whatever barrier it was facing. I pressed my ear against the cold metal, straining to hear anything over the frantic pounding of my own heart. The scraping returned, closer this time, accompanied by a series of muffled thuds against the door itself. It wasn't a battering ram, more like a desperate, clumsy attempt to force its way through. Each impact sent a vibration through the metal, a grim reminder of what lay just inches away. The air in the small space felt thick and heavy, and the smell of ozone, faint but persistent, seemed to intensify. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The sounds continued intermittently, a sporadic assault that was almost worse than a constant barrage. It was unpredictable, keeping me in a perpetual state of alert. I shifted my weight, trying to find a more comfortable position, but there was no comfort to be found. My muscles ached, my throat was dry, and the gnawing fear in my stomach had settled into a dull, constant ache. I found myself scanning the immediate surroundings again, as if a new option might have miraculously appeared in the dim light. It hadn't. Then, a new sound. A low, guttural growl, laced with an unnerving intelligence. It wasn't the mindless rage I'd heard before. This was different, more deliberate. It felt like a challenge, a warning. The scraping started again, more vigorous now, as if whatever was on the other side had found a new point of leverage. I braced myself, my hands clenching and unclenching at my sides. The metal of the door felt impossibly thin. I imagined the claws, or whatever it was, tearing at the edges, seeking any weakness. The possibility of it breaking through was no longer a distant fear, but a very real, imminent threat. The growling escalated, becoming a series of sharp barks and snarls that echoed strangely in the confined space. The thuds against the door became more frequent, more powerful. The metal buckled slightly inward with one particularly strong impact, and I stumbled back. A jagged tear appeared in the seam near the bottom, and a faint, sickly green luminescence seeped through. It pulsed, a sickly heartbeat of whatever horror was waiting. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the door would not hold for much longer. The decision about what to do on the other side, the moral quandary I'd pushed aside, was no longer a choice. It was a forced exit. Thank you for joining me on this journey. As we stand at this precipice, the echoes of what has transpired serve as a stark reminder of the ever-present need for preparedness. The chilling luminescence, the buckling metal, and the inevitable breach we faced underscore a crucial truth: the unexpected can, and often will, arrive without warning. It's a lesson etched in desperation, a testament to the fragility of our perceived security. Always remember, even a simple, sturdy barricade, reinforcing weak points with whatever materials are at hand, sandbags, tightly packed debris, or even well-secured furniture, can buy precious time. This isn't about fear-mongering, it's about cultivating a mindset of resilience. Our experiences, from the initial unsettling sounds that morphed into a terrifying reality to the desperate measures we were forced to take, highlight how quickly a familiar world can unravel. The story of Sarah, finding solace and a means of communication through the old ham radio, demonstrated the enduring power of connection, even amidst isolation. It was a beacon, a fragile thread reaching out into the unknown, proving that ingenuity and resourcefulness can spark hope in the bleakest of circumstances. Likewise, the resilience of David, utilizing his knowledge of local flora to identify edible and medicinal plants, showed that understanding the natural world can be a vital lifeline when modern conveniences fail. These aren't just tales of survival, they are affirmations of the human spirit's capacity to adapt and endure. The moments of intense pressure, where rational thought felt like a distant memory, are perhaps the most critical to reflect upon. It's in those instants of sheer panic that our training, our instincts, and our ability to maintain composure are truly tested. When faced with overwhelming chaos, take a breath. Focus on the immediate, the actionable. Break down the insurmountable problem into smaller, manageable steps. This mental discipline, the calm deliberation amidst a storm of fear, is as vital a tool as any physical preparation we might undertake. It's the quiet strength that allows us to see solutions where others see only despair. I hope these narratives have resonated with you, not as mere entertainment, but as valuable lessons for navigating an uncertain future. The world we thought we knew can change in an instant, and the ability to adapt, to learn, and to remain steadfast in the face of adversity is our greatest asset. Please consider subscribing for more insights and sharing your own thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your participation enriches this community, and together, we can build a stronger foundation of preparedness.